I wonder sometimes if I remember the sunlight correctly. In my mind, Bloomsbury is always bathed in an impossible, golden afternoon glow. The kind that only exists in bad oil paintings or the nostalgia of dying men. I can still smell the specific, dusty sweetness of the library at University College, a scent composed of decaying paper, floor wax, and the cherrywood pipe tobacco Professor Halloway smoked in defiance of the fire wardens. We argued about Kant and the categorical imperative, treating morality like a geometric proof, clean, absolute, theoretical. I was 22, and I thought the world could be dismantled and understood if one simply applied enough rigorous syntax to it. I was a student of structure. I believed in the architecture of logic. Then the memory dissolves, replaced by the sensory truth of the cellar in Lyon. There was no golden light there, only the suffocating, subterranean gloom that smelled of wet coal, stale urine, and the sour fermentation of old wine. The silence was not the respectful hush of a library. It was a heavy, predatory thing, waiting to be broken by the strike of a boot on cobblestone. I sat on a crate that had once held Burgundy, my knees drawn to my chest, trying to stop my hands from trembling by reciting German verb conjugations in my head. Structure. I needed structure because the world above the cellar grate had lost its mind. They tell you in training that you are a soldier, but the SOE didn't make me a soldier. They made me a liar. A ghost. I wasn't carrying a Lanfield and charging a trench. I was wearing a stolen jacket that smelled of another man's sweat, clutching a forged ration card, and waiting for a radio signal that was 3 hours late. I looked at the radio set, concealed inside a battered leather suitcase. It was a marvel of miniaturization, they said. To me, it looked like a trap. I hated the thing. I hated the wire antenna, snake crawling up the moldy wall to the ventilation shaft. I hated the way the dials felt slick under my sweating fingers. But mostly I hated what it represented. The tether to London, to men in tweed suits drinking lukewarm tea who moved us around like pawns on a map they hadn't seen in 20 years. My fear wasn't for my own skin. That's a lie. Of course I was afraid of dying. But the terror that woke me up gasping, the terror that sat like a stone in my gut, was the thought of the others. The network. I thought of Henri, the baker with the flour-dusted eyebrows who passed me messages inside hollowed-out baguettes. I thought of Elodie, the train conductor who memorized timetables for troop movements. They were amateurs, civilians, people with families and futures. I was the professional, the agent, the one supposed to know the game. If I slipped, if I conjugated the verb wrong, if I forgot the lie, they were the ones who would scream in a basement at the Avenue Foch. I shifted my weight, the wood of the crate biting into my thigh. Through the narrow grate at street level, I could see feet passing by, the rhythmic clack of civilian shoes, the shuffle of the elderly, and then the heavy, metallic thud of jack boots. The sound froze the air in the cellar. I pressed my eye to the dirty slice of glass. 2 pairs of black boots had stopped just outside the bakery across the street. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the body language, the sharp, angular gestures of authority. They were stopping someone, a man in a gray coat. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. It was Henri. I knew that coat. I had seen him patch the elbow 3 days ago. I watched helpless as the soldiers crowded him. One of them, a towering figure, shoved Henri against the wall. I saw Henri's hands go up, not in surrender but in a desperate, placating gesture. He was explaining. He was begging. I could do nothing. To open the cellar door was to doom us both. To shout was suicide. This was the reality my philosophy professors never prepared me for. The moral imperative to sit in the dark and watch a good man be terrorized because the mission, the abstract, bloodless mission, was more important than the human being. They let him go. After an eternity that might have been 2 minutes, the boots turned and marched on. Henri slumped against the wall, then hurried away, his gait uneven. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, the oxygen rushing back into my lungs with a dizzying rush. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the crate until my knuckles turned white. I told myself, The radio sparked to life. It wasn't a sound so much as a change in the room's pressure. The static hissed, a low serpentine noise. I scrambled to the suitcase, donning the headphones. The Morse came in rapid, staccato bursts, a rhythmic tapping that my brain automatically translated into letters, then words, then meaning. It was the only time I felt competent, when the chaos of war was reduced to a linguistic puzzle. The transmission cut. The static died. I sat in the ringing silence, the headset heavy on my ears. They wanted me to go north, to the coast, into the teeth of the fortifications. The command was absurd in its simplicity. It carried the weight of a death sentence delivered by a telegram boy. I looked at the damp walls, the darkness pressing in. I was a student who should have been writing a thesis on the sublime nature of tragedy. Instead, I was living it. I packed the radio. I checked the Walther PPK in my waistband, the cold steel feeling alien and clumsy against my hip. I wasn't a warrior. I was a fraud with a good accent. But the radio had spoken, and in the theology of the SOE, the radio was God. Analyze, deconstruct, clegg, 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 clegg. Man is only completely a man when he plays. Third lane past the church, the farmhouse with the blue shutters. Leclerc observe, verify, never rush. Le Figaro, if you fire, you die. If you die, the codes in your head die. If the codes die, the network goes dark. London goes blind. Thousands will die because you couldn't sit still. I had to, it was for the greater good. To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. The irony tasted like ash in my mouth. I had yielded. I had yielded everything that mattered. When they finally lowered the gun and offered me a piece of bread, I broke down. Not with tears, but with a dry, heaving shudder that racked my body. I was alive. I was back in the network. I had returned, but I hadn't brought back the Holy Grail. I hadn't brought back a magic sword. No, I sit here in my study in London. The rain is beating against the window pane, blurring the lights of the city. I am an old man. My hands are spotted with age, shaking slightly as I hold this pen. The walls around me are lined with books, thousands of them. Philosophy, history, ethics. I spent my life collecting them, reading them, desperately searching for a paragraph that would explain what I did. I tried to go back to the university. I tried to sit in the lecture halls and listen to men in tweed jackets talk about the nature of truth. But I couldn't hear them. All I could hear was the silence of that street in Lyon. I realized then that the harvest was ruined. The machine of logic I had built my life upon was broken forever. There is no logic in the shadows. There is no clean academic truth. The elixir I brought back from the underworld is a poison. But it is the only truth I have to give you. Victory for a spy is never a parade. It isn't confetti and cheering crowds. It is a quiet room. It is living with the knowledge that to save a nation, you sometimes have to sacrifice your own humanity. I had to walk away. I had to let them be taken. That is the ghost I have lived with for 60 years. The faces of the people I didn't save are the real history of that war. They are the footnotes that bleed. I never found out what happened to Henri and Marie. I never looked for their names on the lists. I was a coward to the end. I wanted to keep them in that truck, suspended in the moment before the horror began, rather than know the date they turned to smoke in a Polish sky. So look at me. Look closely at this old face. When you read of heroes, remember us, the ones in the margins, the ones whose victories were etched in silence and paid for with ghosts. We are the ones who held the line in the dark so you could stand in the light. This memory is a shard of glass I carry. Help me pull it out. Subscribe to keep this history alive.